Alexander Chen stepped out of his black Tesla onto the pristine sidewalk outside Chen Technologies headquarters, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished concrete. At 38, he had built a tech empire worth $12 billion, transforming from a struggling immigrant's son into one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley. The morning sun reflected off the glass towers surrounding him, creating a cathedral of corporate success that he had helped design. Alexander moved with the confident stride of someone who had never known defeat in the business world, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored, his expression focused and determined. As he approached the main entrance, security guards nodded respectfully, employees hurried past with reverent glances, and the familiar rhythm of his controlled world continued as it had for years. Alexander thrived on this predictability, this sense of absolute control over his environment and circumstance. But today would be different. A small figure emerged from behind one of the decorative planters near the building's entrance. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting, and clothes that had seen better days. He clutched something tightly in his small hands as he approached the imposing businessman. Alexander's first instinct was to signal security, but something about the child's demeanor stopped him. The boy wasn't aggressive or threatening. He was nervous, desperate, and clearly working up the courage to speak. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you the rich man who owns this building?" Alexander paused, studying the child with the same analytical gaze he used in boardroom negotiations. The boy's clothes were clean but worn, his shoes had holes, and his eyes held a maturity that seemed far beyond his years. "I am Alexander Chen," he replied carefully. "This is my company." The boy took a deep breath, as if preparing for the most important moment of his young life. "My name is Tommy Martinez. I need your help." Alexander glanced at his watch, already calculating how this interruption would affect his morning schedule. But something in the boy's earnest expression made him pause. What kind of help? Chapter 2. The Desperate Plea. Tommy Martinez looked up at the tall businessman with eyes that held both hope and fear. In his small hands, he cradled a red toy car that had clearly been his treasured possession for years. The paint was chipped, one wheel was slightly bent, and the doors no longer opened properly, but he held it as if it were made of gold. "My mom is really sick," Tommy began, his voice trembling slightly. "She can't work anymore, and we don't have money for her medicine. The doctor says she needs it every day, or she might die." Alexander felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. He had heard countless sob stories from people seeking investments, donations, or handouts, and he had learned to dismiss them with practiced efficiency. But there was something different about this child's honesty, something that cut through his usual defenses. "I'm sorry to hear about your mother," Alexander said, his voice softer than usual, "but I'm not sure how I can help you." Tommy held up the toy car with both hands, offering it to Alexander like a sacred gift. "Please, sir, will you buy my car? It's my most special thing, but I want to sell it to help my mom. I know it's not worth much, but maybe you could give me enough money to buy her medicine for one day?" The request hit Alexander like a physical blow. This child was offering to sacrifice his most precious possession, likely his only toy, for his mother's medical care. The innocence and desperation of the gesture awakened something in Alexander that had been dormant for years. "How much do you think your car is worth?" Alexander asked gently. Tommy's face scrunched up in concentration. "I don't know, sir. Maybe $5? $10? I just need enough for mom's medicine. It costs $15 for one day." Alexander stared at the worn toy car, seeing not just a child's plaything, but a symbol of pure love and sacrifice. In that moment, his perspective on wealth, success, and what truly mattered began to shift in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. "Tell me more about your mother, Tommy." Chapter 3. The story unfolds. Tommy's face lit up with the opportunity to talk about his mother, and Alexander found himself genuinely listening in a way he hadn't done in years. The boy spoke with the unself-conscious honesty that only children possess, painting a picture of love, struggle, and quiet heroism. "My mom's name is Maria," Tommy explained, still holding the toy car carefully. "She used to clean offices at night so she could take care of me during the day. She would sing to me in Spanish and make the best rice and beans, even when we didn't have much food." Alexander noticed how Tommy spoke about his mother in the present tense, as if refusing to accept that her condition might worsen. The child's optimism in the face of such dire circumstances was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "She got sick about 3 months ago," Tommy continued. "First she was just tired all the time. Then she started coughing and couldn't breathe good. The free clinic doctor said she has something wrong with her lungs and needs special medicine every day." The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. "But the medicine costs $15 every day, and we don't have that much money. Mom tried to keep working, but she kept getting sicker. Now she can barely get out of bed, Alexander found himself calculating automatically. $15 a day meant over $5,000 a year for medication alone. For him, that was less than he spent on a single business lunch. But for this family, it represented an impossible barrier between life and death. "Where is your father, Tommy?" Alexander asked gently. The boy's expression darkened slightly. "He left when I was little. Mom says he couldn't handle being a dad, but that's okay because Mom is the best parent anyone could have." The fierce loyalty in Tommy's voice reminded Alexander of his own childhood, when his immigrant parents had worked multiple jobs to provide for their family. He had forgotten what it felt like to worry about basic necessities, to measure love in sacrifices rather than acquisition. "And you think selling your toy car will help?" Alexander asked. Tommy nodded earnestly. "It's all I have that might be worth something. Mom doesn't know I'm here. She would be upset if she knew I was bothering important people." Chapter 4. A Glimpse of Innocence. Alexander knelt down to Tommy's eye level, a gesture that surprised both the child and the security guards who were watching from a distance. At this height, he could see the determination mixed with fear in the boy's eyes, the way his small hands trembled slightly as he continued to offer the toy car. "This car must be very special to you," Alexander observed, examining the worn toy more closely. It was a simple die-cast model, probably purchased from a dollar store years ago, but it had been loved and played with extensively. Tommy's face brightened with memory. "My mom gave it to me for my 6th birthday. She saved up for weeks to buy it, and she said it was magic because it could take me anywhere I wanted to go in my imagination. I used to drive it around our apartment and pretend I was taking Mom on vacation to places where she wouldn't have to work so hard." The innocence of the child's words struck Alexander profoundly. Here was a boy who had created elaborate fantasies about caring for his mother, who had found joy and adventure in a simple toy, who was now willing to sacrifice that joy for love. "Have you tried asking other people for help?" Alexander asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Tommy nodded sadly. "I asked at the grocery store, at the gas station, even at the church. Most people said they were sorry but couldn't help. Some people got angry and told me to go away. One lady gave me $2, but that's not enough for even one day of medicine." Alexander felt a surge of anger at the thought of adults dismissing this child's desperate plea for help. He realized that Tommy had probably been wandering the streets for days or weeks, approaching strangers with his toy car, facing rejection after rejection while his mother's condition worsened. "You're very brave, Tommy," Alexander said quietly. "Not many people would be willing to give up something so precious for someone they love." Tommy shrugged with the matter-of-fact acceptance of childhood. "Mom always takes care of me. Now I want to take care of her." Alexander stood up slowly, his mind racing with possibility. He looked at the toy car still extended in Tommy's small hands, then at the corporate headquarters behind him, then back at the child who had somehow managed to penetrate his carefully constructed emotional barriers. "Tommy, I'd like to meet your mother." Chapter 5. The Visit. Alexander's decision to visit Tommy's home surprised everyone, including his personal assistant who frantically rearranged his schedule. The boy led him through streets that seemed to exist in a different world from the gleaming corporate district, past rundown apartment buildings and small businesses struggling to survive. Tommy chattered nervously as they walked, pointing out landmarks in his neighborhood with the pride of a tour guide. "That's where Mr. Rodriguez fixes cars. He's really nice, but his shop is closing because not enough people can afford repairs. And that's the corner store where Mrs. Kim lets me sweep sometimes for a piece of candy." Alexander observed the community through new eyes, seeing not just poverty but resilience, not just struggle, but dignity. These were people working hard with limited resources, supporting each other in ways that his wealthy circles never seemed to. They stopped in front of a modest apartment with peeling paint and a broken front step. Tommy bounded up the stairs with the energy of youth, while Alexander followed more slowly, his expensive shoes seeming absurdly out of place on the worn carpet. "Mom!" Tommy called as he opened the apartment door. "I brought someone to meet you." The apartment was tiny but spotlessly clean, with furniture that had been carefully maintained despite its age. The smell of illness hung in the air, mixed with the lingering aroma of home-cooked meals and the faint scent of cleaning supplies. Maria Martinez emerged from the bedroom, moving slowly and supporting herself against the wall. She was a woman in her early 30s, but illness had aged her prematurely. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, and her clothes hung loosely on her diminished frame. Despite her obvious weakness, her eyes held the same fierce love and determination that Alexander had seen in her son. "Tommy, what have you done?" she asked in accented, her voice a mixture of concern and embarrassment as she noticed Alexander's expensive suit. "Mom, this is Mr. Chen. He's the rich man I told you about, and he wants to help us." Maria's face flushed with mortification. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I told Tommy not to bother people with our problems. Please forgive him. He's just a child who loves his mother too much." Alexander found himself moved by the woman's dignity, even in her desperation. Chapter 6. A Mother's Pride. Maria Martinez attempted to straighten her appearance despite her obvious exhaustion, her maternal instincts overriding her physical weakness. She gestured for Alexander to sit on their small couch, then moved carefully to the kitchen to prepare coffee with hands that shook slightly from illness and medication. "Please, you don't need to," Alexander began, but Maria raised her hand gently. "In my family, we always offer hospitality to guests," she said with quiet dignity. "It may not be much, but it comes from the heart." Alexander watched as she moved through the tiny kitchen with practiced efficiency, despite her labored breathing. Every action seemed to cost her energy she couldn't spare, yet she maintained the grace and pride of someone determined not to be diminished by circumstances. Tommy sat beside Alexander on the couch, still clutching his toy car, but now looking worried about his mother's reaction to his initiative. "Mom, I just wanted to help. Mr. Chen seems really nice, and maybe he could buy my car for enough money to get your medicine." Maria's eyes filled with tears as she returned with 2 mismatched cups of coffee. "Mijo, your car is your most precious thing. I can't let you sell it, especially not to a stranger who has better things to do than worry about our problems." "Mrs. Martinez," Alexander said gently, "Tommy approached me because he loves you. That's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of." Maria sat down carefully, her breathing still labored from the simple task of making coffee. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate your kindness in coming here, but I don't want charity. I've worked my whole life, and I've always taken care of my son. This illness, it's temporary. I'll get better and find work again." Alexander could see the determination in her eyes, the same fierce independence that had probably carried her through years of single motherhood and financial struggle. But he could also see the fear she was trying to hide, the knowledge that her condition was worsening and that her options were running out. "Tell me about your work," Alexander said, genuinely curious about this woman who had raised such an extraordinary child. Maria's face brightened slightly. "I cleaned office buildings for 8 years. Night shift, so I could be home with Tommy during the day. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it paid enough for us to get by." Chapter 7. Understanding Sacrifice. As Maria spoke about her life, Alexander began to understand the depth of sacrifice that had shaped both mother and son. She described working from midnight to 8 in the morning, then coming home to prepare breakfast for Tommy, help him get ready for school, and spend the day caring for him before catching a few hours of sleep. "Tommy never knew how tired I was," Maria said with a soft smile. "I wanted him to have a normal childhood, to feel secure and loved, so I would play with him, help with homework, take him to the park when I could. He was my motivation for everything." Alexander glanced at Tommy, who was listening to his mother with the intense attention of a child who understood more than adults realized. The boy's maturity suddenly made sense. He had been observing his mother's sacrifices for years, learning lessons about love and responsibility that most children never encountered. "When did you first notice you were getting sick?" Alexander asked gently. Maria's expression grew more serious. "About 4 months ago, I started having trouble breathing during work. At first, I thought it was just the cleaning chemicals or being tired, but it got worse, and I started coughing up blood." She paused, glancing at Tommy with the protective instinct of a mother trying to shield her child from frightening realities. "The doctor at the free clinic said I have a lung condition that needs daily medication to prevent it from getting worse. Without the medicine," she didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the small apartment. Alexander found himself calculating not just the cost of the medication, but the broader implications of Maria's situation. The medical bills, the lost income, the impossible choice between treatment and basic survival. "The medicine costs $15 a day. I've been trying to take it every other day to make it last longer, but the doctor says that's dangerous. Tommy doesn't know that I've been skipping doses." Alexander looked at Tommy, who was pretending to play with his toy car, but was clearly listening to every word. The child's earlier desperation suddenly made even more sense. He had probably noticed his mother getting worse despite the medication, not knowing that she was rationing her treatment. "Mrs. Martinez, what would it mean for you to have consistent access to your medication?" Chapter 8. The Revelation. Maria's eyes filled with tears at Alexander's question, and for the first time since he had arrived, her carefully maintained composure began to crack. She looked at her son, then back at Alexander, struggling with the vulnerability of admitting just how desperate their situation had become. "It would mean I could get better," she whispered. "The doctor says if I take the medication consistently for 6 months, my condition should stabilize. I could go back to work, provide for Tommy properly again, but $15 a day for 6 months. That's almost $3,000. I don't have that kind of money." Alexander did quick mental math. $3,000 was less than he spent on a single business dinner, less than the cost of his monthly car payment, an amount so small in his world that it barely registered as an expense. Tommy suddenly spoke up, his voice small but determined. That's why I want to sell my car, Mom. If Mr. Chen gives me enough money, you can take your medicine every day and get better. Maria reached over and pulled her son close, her tears flowing freely now. Mijo, your car isn't worth $3,000. It's a beautiful gesture, but it's not enough to solve our problems. But it's all I have, Tommy said, his own eyes beginning to water. I don't have anything else to give you. Alexander watched this exchange with growing emotion, seeing the pure love between mother and son, the child's desperate desire to help, and the mother's heartbreak, her inability to accept her son's sacrifice while also being unable to solve their crisis herself. Tommy, Alexander said quietly, can I see your car again? The boy immediately handed over the worn toy, and Alexander examined it carefully, turning it over in his hands as if appraising a precious artifact. The weight of the moment settled over the small apartment as both Maria and Tommy watched him with hopeful anxiety. This is a very special car, Alexander said finally. It's been loved, played with, and cared for. It's carried dreams and adventures, and now it represents the love of a son for his mother. He paused, looking directly at Tommy. I think it's worth exactly what you're asking for it. Maria gasped. Mr. Chen, you can't be serious. It's just a toy. No, Alexander interrupted. It's much more than that. Chapter 9. The Unexpected Response. Alexander stood up from the couch, still holding Tommy's toy car, and reached into his jacket pocket for his phone. Both Maria and Tommy watched in confused silence as he made a call, speaking quietly to someone on the other end about medical payments and pharmacy arrangements. Mrs. Martinez, Alexander said after ending the call, I'd like to make you an offer. Tommy has asked me to purchase his car to help with your medical expenses. I accept his offer. Maria shook her head frantically. Sir, please, you don't understand. We can't accept charity. I've always worked for what we have, and I can't take money from a stranger, no matter how kind you are. Alexander smiled, the first genuine smile he had felt in months. This isn't charity, Mrs. Martinez. This is a business transaction. Tommy is selling me something of great value, and I'm paying him a fair price for it. But a toy car isn't worth thousands of dollars, Maria protested. Value isn't always measured in dollars, Alexander replied. This car represents love, sacrifice, and hope. It represents a child's willingness to give up his most precious possession for someone he loves. In my world, those qualities are priceless. Tommy looked confused, but hopeful. Does that mean you'll buy my car, Mr. Chen? Alexander knelt down to the boy's level again. Tommy, I will buy your car, but I want to make sure you understand what you're selling me. You're not just selling me a toy. You're selling me a reminder of what's truly important in life. You're selling me a lesson about love that I had forgotten. He paused, looking at both mother and son. In exchange for your car, I will pay for your mother's medication for as long as she needs it. I will also make sure she has access to the best medical care available, and I will set up a fund to help with your family's other expenses while she recovers. Maria began to sob, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the offer. I don't understand why you would do this for strangers. Alexander thought about his answer carefully. Because your son reminded me of something I had lost. The understanding that wealth means nothing if it's not used to help others. Because you both showed me what real love looks like. And because sometimes, a simple act of kindness can change everything. He handed Tommy a business card. This has my personal number on. I want you to call me if you or your mother need anything at all. Chapter 10. The Transformation Begins. Over the following weeks, Alexander found himself thinking constantly about Tommy and Maria Martinez. He had arranged for Maria's medication to be delivered daily, had connected her with a top pulmonologist, and had set up a trust fund to cover their living expenses. But more than the financial assistance, he found himself changed by the encounter. The toy car sat on his office desk, a constant reminder of the lesson Tommy had taught him. Colleagues and business partners noticed the worn red vehicle among Alexander's expensive executive accessories, but none dared to ask about its significance. Alexander began to see his wealth differently. Where once he had viewed his billions as a scorecard of personal achievement, he now saw them as tools for creating meaningful change. He started researching charitable organizations, looking for ways to make a lasting impact on families like the Martinez family. His assistant, Jennifer, noticed the change immediately. Mr. Chen, you've been different lately, more thoughtful. Is everything all right? Alexander looked up from the reports he was reading about childhood poverty in their city. Jennifer, how many families do you think are struggling with medical expenses they can't afford? I'm not sure, sir. Probably thousands in our area alone. Find out the exact number, Alexander said, and find out what it would cost to help them. Meanwhile, Maria's health was improving dramatically with consistent medication and proper medical care. The color had returned to her cheeks. Her breathing was easier, and she was beginning to talk about returning to work. But Alexander had other plans. When he visited the Martinez apartment the following, he brought a proposal that would surprise them both. Mrs. Martinez, I've been thinking about your work experience. You spent 8 years maintaining office buildings, ensuring they were clean and safe for employees. That requires attention to detail, reliability, and strong work ethic. Maria nodded, unsure where the conversation was heading. I'd like to offer you a position with my company, not as a cleaning person but as a facilities manager. You would oversee the maintenance and care of our headquarters building, managing a team of workers and ensuring everything meets our standards. Maria's eyes widened in shock. Mr. Chen, I don't have the education or experience for that kind of position. You have something more valuable, Alexander replied. You have integrity, dedication, and the ability to see what needs to be done. The rest can be learned. Chapter 11. Ripple Effects. 6 months after Tommy's desperate plea outside the corporate headquarters, the Martinez family's life had been completely transformed. Maria was thriving in her new position at Chen Technologies, her health fully restored and her confidence growing daily. Tommy was excelling in a new school that Alexander had helped them afford, and their small apartment had been replaced with a comfortable home in a safe neighborhood. But the changes extended far beyond one family. Alexander had established the Tommy Martinez Foundation, named after the boy whose toy car had opened his eyes to the needs around him. The foundation focused on providing medical assistance to families who couldn't afford necessary treatments, and it had already helped over 200 families in their first 6 months of operation. The story of Tommy's toy car had spread throughout the business community, inspiring other wealthy individuals to examine their own charitable giving. Alexander found himself speaking at conferences and charity events, sharing the lesson that an 8-year-old boy had taught him about the true value of wealth. I thought I was successful because I had accumulated billions of dollars, Alexander told a gathering of philanthropists. But I learned that true success is measured by the lives you touch, the problems you solve, and the hope you... Tommy still visited Alexander's office regularly, marveling at seeing his toy car displayed prominently on the billionaire's desk. The boy had grown taller and more confident, but he maintained the same generous spirit that had first captured Alexander's attention. Mr. Chen, Tommy said during one visits, why do you keep my old car on your desk? You could afford any car in the world. Alexander smiled, picking up the worn toy and turning it over in his hands. Because this car is worth more than any Lamborghini or Ferrari. This car taught me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought. They can only be given freely, out of love. Maria often accompanied Tommy on these visits, and Alexander was amazed by her transformation. The frightened, sick woman he had first met had become a confident professional who managed her department with skill and compassion. You saved our lives, she told Alexander during one of their conversations. No, Alexander replied. You and Tommy saved mine. You reminded me what it means to be human. Chapter 12. Full Circle. 1 year after their first meeting, Alexander organized a special celebration at Chen Technologies. The entire building was decorated for a party honoring the Tommy Martinez Foundation's first anniversary, and hundreds of families who had been helped by the organization were invited to attend. Tommy, now 9 years old and full of confidence, was asked to speak to the gathered crowd. He stood at the podium in the company's main auditorium, looking out at faces of children and parents whose lives had been changed by the foundation that bore his name. A year ago, I was really scared, Tommy began, his voice clear and strong. My mom was sick, and I didn't know how to help her. All I had was my toy car, but I loved my mom more than anything, so I wanted to sell it to buy her medicine. The audience listened in complete silence, many wiping away tears as they remembered their own moments of desperation and fear. Mr. Chen didn't just buy my car, Tommy continued. He bought my mom's health, our family's hope, and our future. But more than that, he showed me that when people care about each other, amazing things can happen. Alexander watched from the side of the stage, still amazed by the wisdom and eloquence of the child who had changed his life. The toy car sat in a place of honor on a table nearby, now accompanied by hundreds of letters from families who had been helped by the foundation. I want everyone here to know, Tommy said, his voice growing stronger, that you're not alone. When bad things happen, there are people who care and want to help. Sometimes help comes from places you don't expect, but it always comes from love. The applause that followed was thunderous, and Alexander found himself crying, something he hadn't done in years before meeting Tommy. As the celebration continued around them, Alexander knelt down to Tommy's level one more time. Thank you, Alexander said simply. For what? Tommy asked, genuinely puzzled. For teaching me that the smallest acts of love can create the biggest miracles. Tommy smiled and hugged Alexander tightly. Mr. Chen, you're the one who created the miracle. I just asked you to buy my car. Alexander laughed, realizing that Tommy still didn't fully understand the magnitude of what he had accomplished. The boy had approached a stranger with nothing but hope and love, and in doing so had transformed not just his own family's life, but the lives of hundreds of others. The toy car remained on Alexander's desk, a daily reminder that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the love we share. And every time he looked at it, Alexander remembered the 8-year-old boy who had taught a billionaire the most valuable lesson of his life, that the greatest treasures are often the simplest ones, offered freely from a heart full of love.